Hey everybody, I'm Marina. I'm the creator of Unbossed. And I've created this space because I wanted to share my thoughts with you. I wanted a space to create webinars and podcasts and series. I also wanted to market my speaking engagements and my leadership coaching skills. My first task is going to be to interview a bunch of females in tech around Chicago, and I'll bring those stories to you. More specifically, I've been targeting the only 40 females that I found in Chicago that are chief technology officers or CTOs out of over 700 plus male CTOs in Chicago. And I haven't even gotten into the POC's number yet. So please follow me, watch them, follow them, encourage other females to stay in tech and be in tech. I hope you enjoy. Thanks.
You'll handle it in post.
Great. I have with me Julianna Cole. Thank you so much for coming and joining me in my series of webcasts. So I'm doing this web podcast in Chicago for strong female leaders called Unbossed, because I just believe in the power of females, especially in Chicago. And I don't know if you knew that, but there's only about 35 female CTOs out of at least 700 male CTOs in Chicago. So I had to talk to you, Julianna.
No, thank you for having me. I'm glad to be here. So.
Awesome. So Julianna is an experienced technology and product and operation executive. You have tons of experience we'll talk about. You're currently the VP of Data and Infosys at the Accreditation Council for Continuous Medical Education. Before that, you were CTO of Farm Journal, CIO, Chief Digital Officer. You hold all kinds of chief executive technical roles, which I'm super impressed. I'm a super fan.
Okay.
You got a BA in computer science, an MBA from University of Illinois at Chicago. I saw you have like MIT certification, a PMP, a CSM. So I know for a fact that you're very qualified for all the roles you've held. But I wanted to start with like the story of how we met, and before like I tell my side of the story, I want to hear your side.
Okay, all right. So it's interesting. I remember we met at it was a Women in Data Science event.
Yeah.
It was hosted by TransUnion. I think it was maybe a year and a half, a little more than a year and a half ago now. Yeah. And you were a member of the panel, and I was just there. I was interested and curious, and it just turned out the event happened to be hosted a little bit away from my offices, so just the logistics worked out. But I was really struck by several things. So all of the panelists were phenomenal, so don't get me wrong, but you just had the sheer force of personality, right? You were personable, you were approachable. You talked about, you demonstrated like the way you use some techniques that I like, where you just ask a lot of questions, right? And you ask questions as a way of sort of leading the person into some insights. And I thought that was really great. But then you totally floored me with your directness, right? So we get to a point, I think this is what you were going to share. You get to a point in the panel and you said, there aren't a lot of female CTOs in Chicago. There just aren't a lot. There are only 5, or it was a very small number. And you said, and that's something that we really need to talk about. And I think there's one in the audience today. And I was like, oh my God, and you're like, is she here? Is she here? And I was like, yes, I'm here, but that was how we met. And I remember we chatted afterwards, and just the energy and your enthusiasm. And you talked about your leadership style, and just so many things really resonated with me, but just felt like I sort of got called out. I'm like, I'm just here for the orange juice, So.
I love that. It was so fun because like on my way, so usually the way I prepare for my panels is actually, I hate panels. Like I rarely do them.
You would never know. You would never know.
Why. I was like, I cannot deal with panels. But when I looked at the audience list, because they sent it to me, it was like scrolling through it, and I was like, Julianna Cole is gonna be here. I'm a fan. I'm like one of the only female CTOs in Chicago. And then I actually didn't know what you looked like, but I really hope you were actually attending, because it would have been a total flop if you weren't there.
I was there. No, but that was that was how we met, you know. And I'm a fan. I loved your approach. I loved how you talked about the way you facilitated teams and really trying to empower them. And I'm like, yes, yes, yes. So
I,
that was how we met. That was how we
yeah,
met.
I love that story. It's one of my favorite stories to tell, because like it came out so I didn't even prepare it. I was just like super starstruck. Like
Yeah.
very
Well, I was like, ah. So anyway, but that's how we ended up meeting, and I'm glad, you know. And then we reconnected on LinkedIn, and so here we are today.
here we are. So, Juliana, would you tell me a story of like early days? You studied computer science. Who is Juliana Cole as a young woman? What's the story?
What's the story? You know, it's interesting. Um, I would say I've always been a geek. You know, I remember even in high school uh, being excited about computers. At the time, we won't talk about the year, but there was the Plato network that connected universities, and so I had a chance to get involved with that, and that was in high school. And then I bought a Commodore 64. Most people probably wouldn't even know what that is.
I'm not.
And I started modifying bulletin board software. So I hosted a bulletin board and had a bunch of phone lines. You know, that's what I use my after school money. You know, was to pay for the phone lines to have this bulletin board, and that was it. I met a lot of people, mostly men. In fact, it was a recent conversation with someone where I was sharing what I learned working on bulletin boards in high school, and she said, "Well, were there any women?" I said, there weren't, and it's really sad. You know, in hindsight, it's not surprising, but it's sad. But that was how I got started. You know, just writing uh, bulletin board software, trading software, going to software shows on the weekends, and that led to me majoring in computer science. You know,
Nice.
but that's how it started.
You know, like there's something about your story that maybe I have another question too, which is like, did someone or something spark your interest in computer science? Because for me,
Definitely.
it was never something that I was thought I could be, right? My
Hmm.
dad was the one who was dealing always with software and hardware. So I saw him, I watched him as I was growing up in
Okay.
the space, right? What was that for you?
So it's funny that you mentioned that. I go back to the Plato computer lab. I had a summer job. This was maybe the summer of my sophomore year in high school, and it was a little summer job that you have. And because I was still pretty young, they wanted us to work in the cafeteria, just wiping down tables, which it's like, okay, whatever, it pays. And there was a gentleman there who I cannot remember his name. He saw me studying for the SAT, and
Mm.
he said, "You know what? Maybe you'd like to work in this lab upstairs." And so he takes me from the cafeteria, wiping down tables, and he takes me to the computer lab. And there's this gentleman named Chris, and he said, "Do you know what this is?" And it was like an old, orange screen terminal. And we talked a little bit about that. And that was how I got involved. And he was really involved. There was a lot of chatting and messaging. So it was very social as I think about it. And that caused me, instead of taking the summer money to go buy a camera, right, because I wanted to buy a 35 millimeter camera, which I did buy, but then I sold that and I bought this little Timex Sinclair computer.
Mm.
And it was because Chris, this guy working in the computer lab there, he just made it very accessible. He was very approachable. Probably I would say, looking back on it now, one of the few black men that I met in technology at that time.
Mm.
And then there was a teacher, a computer science teacher in high school, Mr. Denton, and he was, very, yeah, he was just very encouraging, and encouraged us to do more and to learn more and to get more involved in technology. And so it was really the two of them, and Miss Ollie, she was a computer science teacher as well. So those three people, who, it's really powerful because they looked like me. So I never had a big sense of computers were something that I couldn't do because
Mm.
there weren't black people or there weren't women. It was sort of like it was something I could do. For me, the bigger barrier was financial, right?
Okay.
Just, being able to afford it.
Yeah,
So,
absolutely.
yeah.
But and then you move on and go to college
Hmm.
and study CS. back in the 90s, probably, right?
Oh, you're being kind. That's okay. Yeah, back in the 90s. We're just gonna go with that.
Don't wanna
Back
date
in
you
the
too
90s.
much.
That's
But
okay.
I'm sure you were the only or one of the few female Black computer science majors. How was that?
Yeah, true. There were few, although it's interesting. So I went to the Illinois Institute of Technology,
Mm.
and I was a computer science major. You had computer science majors, and then you had MIS majors, which would skew more on the business side. Um, very, very few Black female computer science majors.
Yeah.
There were a few that were maybe like seniors or so, so they were gone by the time I became an upperclassman. But a fair amount of women of color who were in the MIS program, skewing more on the business side. Some of us are still friends even today, but yes. And then there was a young lady in the class behind me who was a computer science major, and we were both involved in the National Society of Black Engineers. So I became her mentor, and we still talk. We've talked as recently as maybe about 2 months ago.
Nice.
So
That's
yeah, but
awesome.
there were not a lot. There weren't a lot of us, So you knew each other and you interacted, and you'd say, hey, I've got a file. Here's what you should. Here's what you can do. Here's what to watch out for. Those
Yeah.
type of things.
Was your personal community, like the community that you got home back to, supportive of your choice of study?
Do you mean like my family, my immediate family?
Yeah, your family, or
Yeah.
generally like the Black community in which you lived in. I'm assuming
Oh
Black,
yeah.
but
Yeah, no, that's true. No, everybody was very supportive. I think there was some very initial shock towards the end of high school, because I really thought I was going to be an architect, and I had done all of these things preparing for that, and then had a horrible experience in drafting and thought, yeah, okay, no, this isn't for me. But no, everybody was very supportive. I never encountered any resistance, so that wasn't it. It was more, I think later there would be people who, because there weren't a lot of people that looked at me perhaps in the room, looked like me in the room at the time, where there might be a presumption of mediocrity, but I never had an issue in the community. Very supportive.
nice. I feel like that it's definitely like a huge incentive, or like at least a huge like factor into growing into what you want to do, right? The fact that maybe you were not stigmatized by the fact that you chose to go into an engineering degree,
Right.
especially computer science, which perhaps for females at the time was not like a preferred career choice.
You know what? It's interesting. No, I never encountered that. I mean, my mother was she was a voracious reader. She'd read everything. She believed in education. So it was less a matter of, maybe I don't agree with what you want to do, although that was never an issue. Her only, insistence was, you're going to college. You will do something with your life, but never anything like that.
Cool. Well, want to talk about maybe like your early years. I know you spent 9 years at Tribune Interactive.
Hmm.
You also got an MBA sometime before that.
Hmm.
What was that, your early career years? Were you a software developer full time, for example?
Yes, I was. So coming right out of graduating undergrad, I was an application developer, software engineer, solo contributor. Although I always felt I was really lucky, because the company that I worked for right after undergrad, they had just turned public. They had been public maybe about a year and a half or two when I joined, maybe 2 years. And so there was just a lot of opportunity. And if you came in and you were hungry and you were willing to put in the work, which I was, there was an opportunity to be promoted pretty quickly. So I ended up managing a small software development team a little over a year after I graduated from undergrad. That
Wow.
doesn't seem like a big thing now when you just look
Yeah.
at the pace of things, but this was the late 80s, so that was a big deal, man. But so that was the early part, and then at some point, I just became uncomfortable with the type of conversations that we would have, right? So as the manager of a development team, you would sit down with your stakeholders, your internal customers, and it was, okay, do X, do Y, and we needed by this date. And I wanted to be part of that conversation. I didn't want to just be an order taker. And that's actually what ended up leading me to go back to pursue an MBA, because I wanted to be part of the conversation. And I felt that I didn't always speak the language of business as a recent computer science grad. And I thought, I'm like, okay, that's a gap. I really need to work on that. And that's what led me to do that. And it served me. It served me very well over the years.
Nice.
So,
Like, were you working while you were getting your MBA?
I was, and so it took longer than I may have wanted it to, but super useful in a lot of ways, especially afterwards. I mean, it's not really tech related, but when you're pursuing a degree and you're working full time, you realize very quickly that you really don't have a lot of free time to socialize. And then right after I graduated, I remember, like, oh my God, I can actually go to this movie. I can go to dinner with some friends and I don't have to rush back and do homework. And I remember they were like, oh, now you're calling us. I was like, well, yeah, I don't have homework or projects to turn in. So yeah, but I did. And it's a different level of commitment. It's a commitment everybody has to have, whether you're going to school full time or part time. But it can weigh on you, and you just start to feel like, am I ever going to be done? Right. But you get through it.
Nice. I love that. Yeah, like there's so many people that now they struggle with continuing their education because it takes so much away from other things.
It does, yeah. But I was, I mean, relative to now, I was young. My hat's off to, the young people that have family obligations, they're working full time and going to school. That's huge. My biggest issue was, I couldn't maybe go out to, happy hour on a Thursday. I didn't have to worry about, I need to get home and make sure a family is taken care of and then, work. So comparatively speaking, I had it easy. So.
Nice. So we got into like a little bit of your now like your more like leadership experience as we move into, you became like a VP and CTO of Tribune. So I saw from your resume or from your LinkedIn profile that you like actually put in the work and climb, like you can tell that you climb position and you climb the ladder there. Yep. As a Black woman in technology, what was that experience like?
That's a good question. It was I would say it was I felt it in the very beginning. I remember coming home one time. I was talking to my mom. I was like, everybody, they're just looking at me. It's all of these tall white men in the room, and they look at me like like I mentioned it earlier. Like I would say I think two things. So first of all, this was not, and it turned out to not be true of the vast majority of the people in the rooms, because many of them became mentors and were very supportive. I mean, so some of it is just things that I brought that I had experienced before. So in all fairness, I don't want to paint everybody, with a single brush. But I just remember feeling almost very overwhelmed about it. And my mother said, okay, you can feel that way. That's great. But then you need to put that to the side and do what you're supposed to do. You need to, turn in excellence, because otherwise you'll be paralyzed, and you'll actually end up proving, proving the negative things if you let that paralyze you and get in your way. And so that was super useful. And so then it just became a matter of, okay, you know what the situation is going to be, and square your shoulders, put on your helmet, and you get in there. And that's really what it got down to. So, but there were some really wonderfully supportive men, wonderfully supportive white men that were mentors and very helpful. So like I said, I don't want to paint anybody in a bad light. And a lot of great women, as well, who were huge mentors, many of which I still interact with today.
It's awesome. Like Chicago community is like, I feel like it's so tiny, and it's large, but it's like so tiny at the same time, where like, yeah, you know people, right?
No, it's true. I mean, there's like that kind of, there's the Midwest element to it. Yeah, very much. You're like, oh, I know so-and-so. Yeah.
And so like, like as you were like put on your helmet and you're like getting in there and putting in the work, it's like, were there things that you found yourself doing in addition to maybe your counterparts that maybe they did not have to do? Or was your experience just like, you know, like any other experience where you're just like, no, I'm just doing my thing?
Oh, yeah. No, I don't think, I'd love to say that. But yeah, I mean, I think a couple of things. So just my family background, I just came from a family that was always emphasized hard work. You know, my grandparents were part of the Black migration from the South, you know, wanted to make sure that things were better for their children. They actually made sure that my mom and my aunts went to Catholic school because at that time it was, you know, a private school, a better education that African Americans could participate in. And so that was a really big part of just the hard work. So do I feel like there was something that I had to do differently? You know, I just think I was programmed that way at home. Like, you know, you're gonna put in extra time, you're gonna do extra hours, and it's not okay for your delivery to just be average. It's going to have to go above and beyond if you want to shatter through, you know, any stereotypes. Now, was that always true? Probably not. But it, you know, it definitely served me. So did I work longer hours? Yes, you know, but I would have done that either way. That was just it. It's like you got to turn in an above average performance. So.
Yeah, I think where I get upset about is where we are expected as POC, people of color, POCs, to do that just because we are people of color.
Right. Well, now it's interesting. I don't know that I mentioned, I've said it a few times now. I'm going to talk about that, and I've talked about this presumption of mediocrity. So I don't know that I ever felt like there was an expectation that I was going to do more because I was Black. But I do think I wanted to do more because sometimes those interactions made it feel as if not a lot was expected, you know? And it's like, well, no, I'm capable of delivering a lot more. So let me show you. And fortunate enough that just I've been in places where the problem that needed to be solved was more important than necessarily what the person who solved it looked like. And that allowed me to move, you know, and those are the type of situations I still look for. So.
Yeah, I like that. And I like the fact that something that you said that is super interesting to me is like I specifically, I'm going to speak for myself. I bring a lot of context with me where I go, right? Because I'm always like, I am very aware of what I look like, my accent. I'm not Native American citizen. So, you know, I immigrated in America and then became a citizen later on. And so I'm very aware of this, and perhaps I bring it into a situation in which there shouldn't be any context to be brought.
I don't know. I mean, I think there is always, I mean, to your point, I think there is always a context. It's just, I'm going to say, you know, for any given 1 hour meeting, how long do you let that context really be part of your consciousness, right? It's like, okay, I've come in, I've surveyed it. Okay, I've got it. Let me put that to the back burner and let's do what we need to do.
Nice.
Or is it a constant thing? But for me, it always goes back to that first conversation I had with my mom. I hadn't been in corporate America very long, and she was just really clear, like, yeah, you can't let that, you know, it's okay to acknowledge it in your head, but then you need to get over it or you're not going to be able to do what you need to do.
Yeah, absolutely. Your next, like, I want to say this is like 07 to 2019. So like, you know, like a lot of years of experience, 12 years of experience there. You've held multiple executive position as a technical leader in multiple companies throughout the Chicagoland area. I'm not sure if you ever were out of state at any point.
No, oh, unfortunately.
Yeah. And I don't want to like paint it over with a brush, but I definitely want to know, like, what are some of the key lessons that you learned as a technical leader, right? In general, like forget about the fact whether you're female or not, right?
Right.
But then maybe like also like what would you say some of the lessons are with the perspective of teaching somebody like me, perhaps?
Oh yeah. Oh, that's a loaded question, Marina.
Yes.
That's interesting. I would say that. How about this? I would say that the technical chops that often will get you in the door, or maybe even get you the job, depending on the role. But I think as you have more senior level roles, that in and of itself isn't the thing that would get you the job. But the technical skills help. Your technical achievements help open the door, but it's what you say and do once that door is open that determine, you know, how valuable you'll be perceived in the organization, and how much others will start to seek your involvement, right? So I would say, like, right after undergrad, not surprisingly, it was, it's all about the technology. But I realized during those years, and there was a great mentor, a gentleman I had who was a mentor at Tribune, who really helped me understand, it's, you've got something important to say, and how you say it, and the gravitas that comes along with that message when you're in meetings, those all come through. And so that would be a one big takeaway I'd have from those 12 years. Just that, you can never walk away from your technical chops, right? Because that's often what got you there. You can, but for me, I'm a geek, so I'll never walk away from that. But it's also the communication, the connections that you're able to make, and being able to listen in between the lines so that you can help people understand how to use the technology in a way that's not, total geek speak. Those were the biggest takeaways. And listening. Oh my God, I'm still working on listening. That's huge. And I'd say places where I've been most successful, I was a really good listener. Uh, Sometimes by accident. In the places where maybe I would say, ooh, I did okay, turned in some good work, but it wasn't the best. I probably wasn't listening as much as I should have. So,
And so what does like listening as a leader look like in practice?
I think it depends on who you're interacting with. But I think one, it's that you're totally present in the moment, that you are listening. It'll seem like a cliche now, but you're not checking your phone, or checking your email. That you're fully present in the moment. You are listening to all aspects of the conversation. The pandemic, in some ways, has made that a little easier. And what I mean by that is, before, you would think if you're interacting with someone in person, you can look at body language and, change in tone quality. And sometimes that would be hard if it's just email, right?
Mm.
But with more Zoom meetings, or web conferencing, things like that, you can still get the full range of the conversation. And so that I think that's a part of what listening looks like. You're fully present, you're paying attention. When there's an appropriate pause, you're confirming what you've heard, but not in a way where you're just parroting it. And then showing a level of empathy. So, but I think those are true, and that happens, regardless whether you're talking to, your CEO, or it could be the person that you see every evening coming through to make sure that everything is clean the way it's supposed to be. So that's true across the board.
I love that. I love listening, especially, even as it relates to, we were mentioning a little bit earlier, like being a transparent leader. So I know you have some leadership beliefs around this. So beyond listening, what does being a leader mean to you?
So yeah, when so I would think of it in two ways. I think one is a leader for my team, or the people that are most directly, assigned or allocated to my area. And for me, being a leader there is to, one, understand what their ultimate goals are, and then helping them link accomplishing that with what the job requires. Which, I've had some people tell me, that's really unusual. It almost sounds like you're preparing me to leave the team. And I'm like, well, no, not really. But at the same time, I'm sure you have ambitions and aspirations beyond what you do today. And it's going to be in everybody's best interest, yours, the organization's, mine as a leader, if I understand that. Like, if I have enough relationship of a relationship with you, that I understand what your end game is, And it's probably not to do the same thing for 2 or
Forever.
3 years, right? And let's talk about that. And then let me help establish the linkages between what you're doing today, what we're asking you to do, and how you can sort of position that for the next thing. So that's a really huge part of my leadership style with teams, and with stakeholders, or even peers in other areas. It's a little bit similar. You have to understand what it is they want to accomplish, and how you can support that and help establish those linkages. And everybody's in it together. I'm not trying to get you to do something because I need it. It's something that moves your agenda forward, and it also moves the project forward.
That's awesome. I love it. I like the fact that you want to understand what their end game is, and then align your end game with their end game. Right. I think that's very, very, very smart.
Every now and then there isn't an alignment, and then you have that conversation too. but it's important. So
yeah, like how does maybe conflict, I don't know if it's conflict per se, but how does conflict happen at your level, and how do you resolve it?
Well, how does conflict happen at my level? I would alter the question just a little bit, because I think it's less about how conflict happens at a particular level, or that's an element of it, but it's also how conflict plays itself out in an organization. Each organization has a unique culture, and there are some cultures where they're very candid, and so conflicts in those cultures can often be, it's really apparent. It's like, I don't agree with you. That doesn't make sense. You're wrong. You're like, whoa, I think there are other cultures that, may be more collegial, and then the conflict is a little more subtle, and you have to be a little more attuned to listening in between the lines to pick up that, okay, we may have some friction here. There may be some tension. So I think it's less about the level and more about the culture of the organization. Itself. Yeah, it is. It really is. And then, what's the culture actually determines, I think, how conflict plays out when it's a peer versus someone who maybe has a greater title versus, someone who doesn't have as high of a title. But the culture determines how those conflicts manifest themselves, what's appropriate and what's not appropriate, and at what point does someone else end up getting involved. But it's the culture.
Nice. And how do you personally, and as a leader, deal with conflict when it comes up?
Oh, well, when possible, I think, I can think of a situation where there was a conflict, and it was a pretty large meeting, and I think for me, it's a matter of, you just need to take a deep breath and then figure out a diplomatic way to say that, well, we should take this offline and have a one-on-one, right? But ultimately, I always find that's the best way to try to deal with conflict is, dealing with conflict is not a group exercise. It really is something that you want to try, when possible. You want to deal with that on a one-on-one basis. What do they say? Praise publicly and,
correct
not correct privately. Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
So, but that's really the approach. And then once it's a one-on-one, I think for me, it's about just being direct. Like, hey, I did not feel good about the way our interaction ended yesterday. Sort of felt like, we were at a place where, one, we didn't hear each other, and I'm not sure that either of us is positioned for success. How can we make that right? And that's generally worked really well for me.
I love that.
It hasn't happened a lot, but when it has, it's worked well. So.
It definitely sounds like you take a more collaborative approach, which is great.
It helps.
It helps.
Right? I mean, it does. I mean, there's some people that just kind of barrel in, but ultimately there's only so far you can go as a solo contributor, right? It's really bringing multiple people together. I hope I get this saying right. If you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go as a group.
Go together.
Yeah, and so that's that's collaboration, and it means people are making compromises and some trade-offs, but you'll get farther.
Nice. Anything like about your first C-level whether it's chief information or chief technology officer role that is really struck with you? Maybe like one lesson that you're like, I am not gonna make this mistake ever again.
Oh yeah, yeah. You know, it's interesting. My first CTO role was at Tribune Interactive,
Yeah.
and it was interesting because for several reasons, not the least of which that leading up to it, I had sat across from the CTO, and I remember thinking, I don't ever want that job, you know, which was really wild. You know, and wow, what would I do differently? Um, Part of it was just being new, just being new to the role, and you know, interacting with executives who had a lot more experience, and not having as many people at that time that I do now that I could reach out to, you know, for help and some guidance. But some of it was just, I'd almost say there was a level of temerity on my part, where there's sometimes you just have to stand up to the person like, look, you're being a bully. We're not going to do that. That's it. You know, end of subject. And so I think I have far more courage now than
Mm,
I did then. But I also think that was my first C-level role. So I think
yeah,
unless you were just someone who's just totally like, I'm brilliant. Unless you just thought you were that brilliant, you probably would be a little hesitant in your
hesitant.
first
Yeah,
role. Yeah,
absolutely.
yeah.
Going back to like keeping up with your tech chops, I'm super curious about how do you keep up with your technology? I
Mm.
mean, I find it hard to like between the full-time job and the mom and the life to like actually spend time learning.
Yes.
What do you do?
So I'm not a full-time mom, but I have the challenge as well. You know, I pick these, I have this list of like little weekend projects, and I'm never making as much progress against them as I'd like to, but it is useful just to have, you know, have the list. So when there is an opportunity or some downtime, I know exactly what I'm going to go in and look into. So that's one. The other is, occasionally, it will sound odd, but you know, there's just sometimes that you can't sleep, and there's only, you know, so much TV or binging you can do when you can't sleep, and so that becomes the time where I dust off, you know, the weekend project list and start looking at it. So the thing now has been, or more recently, it's been working on like Alexa skills for business intelligence. I mean, it
Uh,
was just really interesting. Like, how might we leverage that? And so I haven't made nearly the progress that I want to on it, but that's how that's an element of keeping, you know, keeping up to date. So that's one. And then I've been very fortunate, and I have some friends that have children who really enjoy technology, and I find that they end up pulling me in too as well. And so I just have to make sure that if I'm going to see them, okay, let me research this because I don't want to seem unknowledgeable. But that's it. And then there, you know, I think like a lot of tech professionals, you'll have your list of, you know, podcasts or websites that you monitor periodically, and the inevitable list of bookmarks that you're going to go back and look at. So I think it's the techniques that most of us do.
nice. I like that. I like that. Any certification that you may think is specifically useful right now?
Ooh. I think it depends on what you want to do.
Okay,
So
fair.
no, seriously. I mean, I think that I know some young people who found themselves sort of in a sysadminish environment, and they're interested in sort of making the transition to other things. And in that case, you might want to pursue some of the DevOps certificates or things along, you know, in those areas. I think I know a number of developers, or people who have maybe been in QA, who actually want to transition to other things. They still like technology, but they don't want to do that. In that case, you would want to pursue perhaps a PMP, or maybe your CSM, you know, becoming a certified Scrum Master or certified product owner at your CPO. I think it just depends on what
Okay.
you're interested in. So
Anything that you like, for instance, like you're specifically searching for when you're hiring, like an AWS certification, Azure, you know, big G now that, you know, the
yeah,
popular.
yeah, I love Google. Is there anything specific? You know, for me, it's I always look for the the proof that the person can learn and wants to learn. So I want a polyglot. right? I just absolutely, which sometimes can be at odds with what you're trying to hire for, because more often than not, you're filling maybe you're backfilling a position, you've got a specific tech stack, you need a certain skill because the person left, and so that causes you to focus potentially focus very narrowly on a certain skill set. But I may hone in on that, but then I'm also looking for evidence that there's some interest in other technologies. Because the truth of the matter is, whatever we're building or working in today, 5 years from now, it's probably not going to be that. And even if it's still in your tech stack, it'll have a smaller footprint,
Nice.
right? So people still have, there's still Java out there in different places, but if you, depending on what you wanted to do, you should probably be looking more at like Node or React or Angular, anything, more of the JavaScript framework. So I look for flexibility, and not someone who's so narrowly focused on the technology that they like or know that they're not willing to look at other things.
Nice. I
Got
like
to have that flexibility.
Yeah, absolutely. And definitely like the willingness to learn new things, super important in tech right now. Like,
Oh, very
I
much
mean,
so.
things
Very
change
much so.
every other month. So
They do, and I have observed. I've interacted with some technologists where they had skills, and just candidly, they've gotten to a point in life and in their career where they're like, I'm not interested in learning another language. Like, oh, okay, I've had that as I've talked with. I can think of this one team member, and it was a good conversation. And so then we started talking about, well, how might your role transition into? It could be around QA automation, maybe it's project management. You've seen a lot of different things, but if you're telling me that you're not really willing to make the investment in mastering another language or another framework, then this probably isn't going to be the long-term solution for you. So that's a perfect example of understanding what that person wants to do or what they don't want to do. There's not an alignment, and then we talk about how do we transition you to something else.
nice. I love that.
And I think he's a project manager now. So it's worked out well. Yeah.
Like we're coming to the end of our hour, and I have 3 paths we can go. Like I feel like they're all interesting, but first choose your own adventure here. First path, first path is Chicago Tech. Like I know you're involved with IC Stars. You want to be involved with Women Who Code. Like you have a lot of like things that you want to be involved in Chicago Tech community. We could spend a little bit of time talking about what is the Chicago Tech community and like how do we help it become better. Obviously, we are not as popular as the coasts, right? So there's
exactly. Yeah, we're the donut hole.
There's something there. I think another way we could go would be like we could talk about how do we raise other women and bring them with us. And then the third, I'll let you pick whichever topic you want to talk about.
Okay. Well, let's definitely not do number 3. So let's not do that. You know what? We were chatting a little earlier. I think given the topic of this series, let's talk about how we mentor and interact and coach with coach other women.
Yeah, so absolutely. So like I share, like I have a 3-year-old daughter and I'm like training her to be an engineer regardless of what she's gonna be in the future, right? Like I'm like, computers are gonna be a part of your life. It's like getting a driver license for us, right? Not for my future generation. She's not gonna need a driver license, but she's gonna need knowledge in computers.
True. That's true.
So like I am putting a lot of effort into that. And I'm also like, I'm of the belief that the way I bring more people into the industry that are people of color or women is by being in it, like by actually like keeping in it. What are some of maybe the things that you're doing to influence others to come along on your journey?
Got it. So you had mentioned my involvement in IC Stars, and that I'd say to date, in many ways, that's been probably one of the most impactful ways that I've been able to participate and give back with young people. And there was a huge focus to make sure let's make sure that we've got more women in technology and more women participating in the program. And it was great to see that that evolve over time. I think like you, I do share the opinion that it's just being in the space. So being in that space, and then being, if you will, an ambassador for that out when you're interacting. It could be officially as a volunteer, like with an organization like IC Stars, but I think it's also it may seem odd, but it's the more subtle interactions as you're interacting with friends or family or extended friends, extended family, and the young women that are in those environments that hear and see what you're doing, right? It becomes reinforcement, an understanding of, I can do that. That's it's not foreign. It's just, it's on so and so or Miss such and such. I know her and she does that, and so I think it's really just our presence. You're being present in your community, your environment with your friends, and sharing the stories of what we've done, the challenges and the successes, and letting people know that you can do it. I think the other too is I remember growing up, and there was always that family member or friend who's like, "How are you doing in school? What are you going to major in? What do you want to do?" And at the time, it was really annoying, but I get it. I get it in hindsight now, right? Because it opens that conversation, and you absolutely know that when you're going to be in that environment, you're going to get those questions, and you need to think about that, and you want to have a really purposeful answer. So that's how that's what I think about it. Yeah, I don't want to say casually, but in a more informal way. I have a goddaughter that I'm very close to, and she is not. She's she, she's an artist. She has no interest in coding, but we talk a lot about just the importance of education and making sure that even if you choose not to do something that's particularly quantitative or analytical, that doesn't mean that it's not important that you master those skills.
Yeah,
Right.
exactly.
And so, sort of doing that. I know she just dreads us getting together. I'm like, how's that going? Tell me the classes that you're taking.
Yeah.
This all sounds pretty soft, but
I
but
argue
she's good.
Yeah, I argue with people, but I tell them, tell me an industry that is not tech right now, because there's none, right? Like there's no industry that is unaffected by technology nowadays.
That is true, and we talk a lot about that because she's into animation, and so there are all these different tablets, and she's using the technology. And I had shared with you earlier, just she's a college student, so money's tight, and there wasn't going to be we weren't buying another Mac. So she had to figure out, how to get a hard drive and expand that and add the memory. It's like, fantastic, good for you.
That's so good. I love
Yeah,
that.
yeah,
I love that about it.
yeah.
Have you gone back to IIT or U of I? Look at the class and
Mhm.
see how maybe it's different now than when you were there.
Yes, not U of I, but a few years ago, this was a number of years ago. So when I was at IIT, I was very involved in student organizations. I was the president of the National Society of Black Engineers, the president of the Student National Technical Association, I was one of the founders for the Association of Computing Machinery. I was an RA, I was a hall coordinator, so very involved in campus life. And I had a chance to go back and speak at a NSBE meeting, and I hadn't been on campus for a while, and I was struck by how many more international students there seemed to be. When I was an undergrad, there was a large international, student presence, but it seemed to be larger, and specifically with people of color.
Right.
So I remember when I had been president in SB, we had maybe 3 or 4 members who were not from the United States, maybe 6 at the max. When I went back to speak, it felt like more than 60% of at least the attendees were international students, and that just really blew me away. In a positive way, but I was like, wow, it's so different, And then I went back to a homecoming event last year, and very similar, very similar.
Wait, any, did you notice any increase in females graduating from CS degrees at all?
A little bit of an uptick. There seemed to be an uptick for a while, and then within the last couple of years, it actually seems to go down a little bit. I was reading about that, and I haven't heard of like a great reason for it, but I would say without continued focus and making sure that you keep that pipeline full of potential students, it doesn't feel like we've changed it systemically,
Mm.
right? I'd feel like if it had been addressed systemically, you wouldn't have to have as much official focus, but it would sort of naturally carry itself.
Mm.
But if you take your foot off a little bit, then you see the numbers dip, which is unfortunate. So,
Hey, Juliana, I know it's 4:31.
yes.
I'm about to wrap up. Can you give me a couple of more minutes?
Yes, I can, sure.
All right, awesome. So I have a couple of final questions for you.
Okay.
So what is one of the books that you have gifted the most?
Oh, gifted the most. I was thinking about that. It's a book it's by Malcolm Gladwell. So it was David and Goliath.
Mm.
Yeah, so David and Goliath. It's really great, and it was interesting because it was actually gifted to me. And I read it, and I'm like, oh my God, this is fantastic. And, I just started telling people about it. You got to read this. You got to read this. But it's really, I enjoyed it. And what I liked about it was that he tells these stories. I think he characterizes them. The title has a subtitle. It's like David and Goliath. I think it's like Misfits or Battling Giants or something like that. And so he tells these different stories of people who seem to potentially be up against unbearable odds, and they would take a slightly different approach that really resulted in them being hugely successful. But then there's also a story of a young lady who takes what seems like the safe or the right route, and perhaps she could have accomplished more if she had maybe just kind of followed her heart, if you will. So
Wow.
that's great. I've gifted that to a number of people.
I'm excited to read it. I haven't read it yet. I'm an avid reader myself, so I'm going for
Oh,
it.
that's good. I think you'll enjoy it. I think you'll enjoy that. Yeah.
Awesome. What is a book you would write? What is the thesis of a book that you may write or have written? I don't know.
Yeah, no, I haven't written any books. What would I write? It's interesting. I don't know. It's a good. Perhaps something around listening to your inner dream and following that, and not letting people really be naysayers. But that's a good one. I'd have to think about that one a little bit more. I've never really considered myself a writer. I like to read a lot, but never really a writer.
Okay, I'm a fan. I'm waiting for your book to come out.
Yeah, right. Yeah. No, I'm trying to think. Or if it wasn't that, then it might be something around just technologists, sort of making a pivot, if you will, from being really a technologist to sort of partnering with your stakeholders.
I like that.
Something along that line, probably.
I like that. From like a solo contributor to a team player or a
I think that's part of it. But I talk about the chameleon on the roller coaster. So that would be the book I'd write. I take that back. That's the book I'd write. Chameleon on the roller coaster.
It sounds like it's you. Literally, it sounds like you've been that chameleon.
Yeah, no, that would be it. Chameleon on the roller coaster. That's the book I would write.
Okay, great. So a little bit about like Unbossed, just to close up, is a leadership coaching program for young females that are in technology, and where I am, coaching younger females. But also, like to me, is about like a new style of leadership in which we're more transparent. We let people be self-performance, self-managed, self-assured, and we don't need so much micromanaging as we used to like in the past. And so maybe a question for you is when you hear the word unbossed, what does that resonate? Like, what does that sound like to you?
Well, it brings up a lot of different ideas. I think one is the notion of independence. But I remember when we first started talking about doing this, I was thinking about it, and my thought is it's really about charting your own course, right? You're charting your own course. You're picking your companions for that journey and what you're going to do. But it's really about just self-actualization. Right? This is what I'd like to do. please join me. You know, for
Absolutely.
me, that's what I think being unbossed is. Even if you encounter, some bumps along the way, right? So it's
Absolutely.
sort of being fearless as you pursue your truth.
Thank you. That is exactly what the message that I want to put out is,
Okay.
to all my network out there, and all the young females that come to me and ask me, like, how do you do it? You need to be unbossed. You need to just
Yes.
do the deed and march forward. But
Put
thank
in
you
the
so,
work.
yeah, put in the work, hard work.
Uh,
Thank you for coming. I
Thank
appreciate you so
you.
much.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me. I really enjoyed this, and good luck. I cannot wait to see all the other ones. I think just the world needs to watch out because Marina's coming.
I hope the
Seriously.
universe hears you.
There you go.
Thank you so much. Have a good day.
Bye bye.
Bye.